The Express.
Just dive in. All right. Welcome back to the Express podcast. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing the next chapter on our little book journey of becoming a king. This chapter in this episode will probably be a shorter one, but yet it'll be jam-packed with good stuff. This episode is about becoming a warrior. Opening thoughts from the crew.
I mean, I liked it. I think it kind of carries into kind of what we taught. I know the last chapter got us fired up, so it kind of like rolled in with that as well, I thought.
Yeah, Dans, what you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, even in the small moments, these things are, like, applicable. It's not always, like, the bigger stuff that changes our whole demeanor. It's, like, a lot of the little stuff we go through daily and multiple times a day. We're finding ourselves doing some of these practical exercises he talks about in the book. Like, Dansby hit it on the breathing techniques and stuff to really, like, get us back centered and aligned with what we want to do with ourselves the rest of the day.
Yeah, and when I was reading the chapter at first, I was ready to rock and roll because he started out hot with the SEAL Team 6.
Yeah.
And so when he started talking SEAL Team 6, I was locked in. The story about that, though, there's a line in the book in which he says, you know, he talks all about the SEAL Team 6 and kind of their story, what they're aimed to do, and they're the best in the world at what they do. And then he kind of, you know, relates it to where he says, we fight what's in front of us to protect what's behind us. And when he said that, it kind of hit a different string for me because that's very true, meaning even if you're fighting a certain battle that you may not consider a battle, like you're not physically fighting someone, but maybe you're doing something that you don't want to do, you're still doing it in order to whether protect, you know, your family or provide for your family or something like that, where it's actually like a smaller little battle within your day.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and too, I like the just like imagery of always keeping your focus on like what's in the present moment. And he touches on that, like I said, with the breathing, but he really goes over about how the enemy lives in the future and in the past, whereas God's presence is like solely felt in the moment. And in order to get ourselves in the moment, we have to use this breathing technique. But just like you said about fighting, you know, what's in front so we can protect what's behind us. It's in that same kind of way. It's like the more that we can stay locked into the present moment and in that heart of a warrior, then the better chance we're going to remain like in the presence of God, which I think is so valuable. And you think of all the moments throughout days that can almost be lost to thinking about what happened or what could happen instead of what's currently happening.
It's kind of an interesting point too, because one of the things that I really try to focus on in my life or just every day is control what you can control.
Mm-hmm.
And being in that exact moment, because if you try to control things that are outside of your control, or if you try to control things that are not in the present moment, you're not going to get the task done that's at hand a lot of the times. And so when he talks about the breathing, I think that's like one of the most important things, because during, you know, throughout your everyday life, when you have things happen to you, it's kind of like, how are you going to respond to that? And then just taking that breath and just breathing can really probably change the way you respond in a lot of situations, which, of course, they're not easy to do that.
Yeah, what's that quote that's like, 10% is what you do, and the other 90% is like how you respond, basically like how you react to what happens. I can't remember if it was a coach that told me that or where I remember reading that or seeing that, but that to me is the warrior thing, because missions don't always go as planned. Life, day-to-day stuff doesn't always go as planned. It's like how we respond in those moments is kind of what dictates our path that we're on. And to that same thing, there's a part, it's on page 91, that says, it's a C.S. Lewis thing that basically says, our enemy fears our rootedness in the present moment and the union with Jesus available here. He will do whatever it takes to keep our hearts pulled into either the past or the future to cut us off from this present moment. And to me, that's just so powerful, because I feel like so many times when I personally get anxious or get worried or stressed, it's because I'm focused on like tomorrow, or I'm focused more on what happened last, like whether it's my last at bat or yesterday's performance or whatever has happened off the field. That's in the past. The more that we stay true to this present moment, then we can like actually experience the things that God has in store for us. It's like, what opportunities have we missed out on because we've been looking ahead or looking behind us? Like, what opportunities have we had as kings in God's kingdom to grow it that we just weren't ready for because our focus was elsewhere.
A good point. And another one that I used to tell the kids is like, if you had $100 and someone stole $10 from you, are you going to let that, dictate? Or I guess if someone gave you $100 and someone took 10, are you going to let that dictate the rest of your day? Or are you still going to look at the bright side and be like, well, I still gained $90? And I think a lot of us that, I try to get better at that too, is something so little or so small can happen to you. And, it may be the first part of your day. And if you let that dictate your entire day, like you're missing out on all these opportunities, and you don't know what these opportunities could be. And
right.
Like your example for, playing baseball or whatever, if you strike out and you let that affect you as you go into the field, well, you could be presented with an opportunity to make a big play to get out of an inning or out of a jam. And if you're not dialed in, then you could lose that opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in life. That's why baseball is such a good metaphor for life. But you got to keep going. And another thing that he said that was really powerful, I thought, was he says, how you view your reality is the greatest force. Meaning, how you view your present day, how you view the situation that you're in, how you view the society that you live in is the greatest deciding factor, like that's going to be for you or against you. And that's a very interesting way to kind of look at it, because and it's true, if you look at life a certain way, it's kind of like the people who always look at life in a very negative way. Well, then it's always going to be negative. If you're always bringing yourself down, and obviously we all have moments where we may talk to ourselves a certain way or whatever, but if you're always bringing yourself and other people down, like you're not going to achieve the greatness that you could achieve if you were being positive and forward looking.
Mm-hmm. This next part that I kind of want to get into about the whole breathing stuff, and I think the reason why I love it so much is because that is a big part of the sport that I play. Like the people that breathe the best tend to be relaxed in those kinds of moments, and I think that's like really, really key. But he kind of, I think he does such a good job of explaining why the breath is so powerful, and it starts with like basically why is breath powerful, and it goes into we are breathing beings because when God made us, he breathed life into this soil, to this dirt that allowed us to become breathing beings. And then it says he designed us for dependence so that every breath might remind our soul that his breath is sustaining us. We're a soul made by God, made for God, and made to need God, which means you were not made to be self-sufficient. And then he goes on into explaining the psychology behind why breathing is so important. And it talks about how deep intentional breathing essentially shuts off your sympathetic nervous system, which is kind of what controls your hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, which is your fight, flight, and freeze response. And by breathing, that deep intentional breath, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is essentially that's responsible for calmness, stillness, well-being, your clear head, and just it's cool that he includes the actual like physiology of why this works, and why God designed us this way, which I just thought was so cool. And then he obviously goes into the 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out of breath, and he kind of puts some attachments to when you breathe in, kind of say to yourself, God, I breathe your breath into me. And as you exhale, it's God, I breathe everything out I need to release. And it's almost like a meditative way of allowing God to recenter you in him and recenter you in your breath so that you can maintain some type of stillness in those moments of chaos. Like I can only imagine when Jesus is walking on water, or when he's sleeping in the boat and they wake him up because there's those storms, and he probably woke up and he was just like everybody, y'all just chill, just like everybody take a deep breath, like relax, rely on me in this present moment, and I'll make all the the storms go away. And he did. I can just only imagine like what in that situation, just how he provides so much calmness because he was calm, because he was in tune with the present moment in his breath, which is just so powerful to me.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories, I think, with him sleeping on the boat. I just envision him like waking up, because he basically is looking at the two people with him. He's just like, do you all not know who I am? Like that's a whole different chapter for a different day. But yeah, I also thought his breathing stuff was very interesting. And I wrote down, you said the idea of like you're not self-efficient. And so I wrote down, we are designed for dependency. No stronger man and king than the king whose heart is fully rooted in, established in, and united with the living God. Mm-hmm. And so we literally cannot live by ourselves, like without air. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he provides that, and like our body works through that, especially with your, you speaking on him literally breathing life into the world. Like that is very, very powerful stuff.
It's such a well-written chapter. Like I just love how he flows through of like, okay, we're going to start out by helping you understand that you're not self-sufficient, that your breath, that God's breath in you is what keeps you in that present moment so that you can experience his peace and stillness. And then that allows you to like feel the unification between you and God. And then he's got the next page on page 93, he's got some verses in John that he talks about, like the goal is for them to become one heart and mind, aka unified, just as you, Father, in me and I in you, so they might be one heart and mind with us. It's almost like he's saying, if we're not in this present moment and using this breath to be centered in this moment, then we can never really experience that unified feeling with God. And it just like, I love how it's like this like ladder of, before you can get to step B, like you have to do step A. And the more that we can live in step A, the more we can experience step B, which is being unified, with Christ and being more Christ-like, which is really why we are doing this, because that's revealing to us our identity, which is the next, that step C in this chapter, which is just, it's so awesome how he kind of portrays this path that we're in need of going on.
It's a very interesting way that you put it, and it kind of reminds me when you're talking about going on a ladder and going from step A to B to C. It kind of reminds me of something that I wrote down, and this is in not the beginning, but I guess sort of near the beginning, probably halfway through. It talks about this idea of training for the fight and like training for the battle. And he says we have to start by doing what's necessary, then we have to do what's possible, and then all of a sudden you're doing the impossible. And if you're sticking with your like little breathing exercise, it's kind of like, I don't know if you all ever do this, but it kind of freaks me out. Like if you focus on your breathing, like how many times you're trying to breathe and like keep pace with it, like it's kind of hard to do. And then you find yourself getting out of breath like very quickly. But if you just like really sink into allowing your body to breathe how it's supposed to breathe, you forget that you're doing it. And it's like you're doing the impossible, right? And then it's kind of like, living in the moment and doing like what's in front of you. And it's kind of too, like speaking on doing the impossible, like they say the reason, like one of the reasons that babies cry when they're first born is because that first breath like hurts so much to their lungs, like it like burns it, and so they start crying. And then so, but after that, obviously like they start doing the impossible. Like to them, taking another breath might be impossible, but after you keep doing it, like you find yourself obviously regulating your breathing. But it's just kind of interesting too. And what else is interesting is when you're breathing and you're not noticing it, it's kind of like faith. Like none of us ever think that we're just going to stop breathing. Like you just kind of, expect your body to continue to do such. And you can't see it. Like you can't see your lungs working. You can't see your body working. And then you're just breathing. And that's kind of one of the things he talks about is what's most important in life is the things that you cannot see. Whether it's your actions that you're doing when people aren't watching or whether it's your faith. And he talks about how Jesus uses this and he uses it to provide clarity and how his message is just so clear and he uses it to kind of like soundproof everything, which is awesome. And he uses that as a tool to prepare himself for that fight.
No, I actually had that highlighted too. The most important things in our human lives are nearly always things that are invisible. I mean, you can go into so many like different examples of that, like with love, faith, friendship, like all this stuff is so big, but it's all the stuff that you can't see. It's never like the material things that are the most important things in life, and that's kind of what we talked about a few episodes ago, and just like what a man of society is now. It's like, how are your relationships and like how are you treating the people that are close to you and your family? Like that is what gives you like that whole feeling, right? It's not like what car you're driving. Like that's cool, but that gets old. Like it's gonna be old at some point, right? Like, but how are you like willing to sacrifice and be there for people and do the things that, these invisible things that hold so much to our soul, right? Like these are the things that are important to our soul.
Yeah, and also too, just thinking about this, it's kind of important to realize that what might be visible to you might be invisible to somebody else. In the sense meaning that, and vice versa, meaning that you can't always tell what battles people are fighting. And I think that's very interesting too when you're talking about, being a good human of society or being a good person. Sometimes people could, like this happens all the time teaching. Sometimes a kid could act out and you might think that the kid is just, trying to get attention or whatever. And he may be, but there also could be an underlying reason or battle that he's facing that is causing him to do that. And just kind of moving on, I got something here. It says, because I think we all can agree that God has a plan for us, right? He has something greater planned for us than we can even imagine or even design ourselves. And the question I said, he asked it in the book, he says, if God has a plan for you, like what plan do you think Satan has for you? Because part of this battles and becoming a warrior and fighting these battles and, honestly, to be 100% honest, like just the ongoing battle to be a Christian and a good man and to be a king, like these are tough things. And so while he's working, Satan is also working. So I'm interested to hear y'all's opinion on that. What you think about that?
I want to say something before we get to that, because just to flow with the chapter, that like it kind of like stopped me in my tracks when I read it. It's at the bottom of page 93, and it's talking about recovering our identity. And it says, identity may play its most strategic role right here in becoming the warrior we were made to be. Your enemy knows who you are and fears who you will become in God's kingdom. The only one who underestimates your life is you. And man, I read that and I was just like, because God loves us so much and has so much in store for us and is going to bless us tenfold of what we can ever imagine, becoming authentically who he created us to be. And we have a hard time accepting that, and we underestimate ourselves. But the enemy also knows that exact same thing. So they're basically trying to pull you in opposite directions, and we're the only ones that don't believe that true potential, no matter which side's telling us. I think about like for me personally in baseball and as a man, like when I really feel right with God and with myself, there's this little like inkling in myself that's like, you could almost say it's self-doubt to some extent of like, man, if you do that, like that, like it's super powerful. Like when you start to embrace yourself, and it's almost scary to some extent of like, holy cow, like the things that I'm able to accomplish through being myself is more than I could ever imagine. And I feel like the enemy's always pulling at us, which leads into what you're talking about, Mace, of like, what is he trying to do to prevent you from being what God's made you to be? Even, and it says even Jesus needed to know that he was like the one, you know, from God. Like he needed to hear it, and he heard it and embraced and accepted that identity. You know, when his father told him like, you are my beloved son, like let's do this, like I'm with you always, you know. And I feel like that kind of leads us into your thought, Mace, about like, how is the enemy scheming against you? You know what I mean? Like, how is the enemy trying to get to you so that you're not going to reach that potential in God's kingdom?
It's a pretty humbling question to like think about. Like I've never, I guess, thought of it that way. Like obviously try to be aware of the sort of, you know, temptations and vices and kind of situations that you get put in, and you know, how do you respond to those things? But to phrase it like, you know, dang, these things are like, Satan's out here to get me, right? Like it's pretty like powerful, because then you can think about it, and I don't know if it's just me, but I like got this image for Satan, so it's just like I can see him doing it, right? Like physically, and like that makes it a lot more clear for me. Just like I can see him back, you know, just like around a corner.
Foot on his thumb.
Yeah, just like bending around a corner, just watching to see if I'm gonna bite.
Yeah,
right?
just like waiting for you to stub your toe on the corner and seeing what's about to happen.
Yeah, that'll ruin your day from the jump. If we're talking about being present,
Be a
that might,
tough 10
yeah, that would
seconds.
be a rough way to start the day. But, and so I think like just that sort of like way of thinking really makes you a lot more conscious of, you know, like these bad things that happen or bad situations. It's like, man, Satan's really out here trying to get me. So what is my plan? And now that I'm conscious of it, it's like, how do I get right and do the right thing of, you know, what God's called me to do? And
Right. Mace, I mean, both of y'all will appreciate this kind of like analogy, because we're all sports people here. If I was a basketball coach, you spend half your practice on what? The things you're good at, whether it's, you know, man-to-man defense, corner threes, like you're going over all the stuff that you're good at, which would essentially be us embracing our full self. Like that's kind of my analogy to practice. But also at the same time, you do film study, you run, you know, you have a scout team that runs the opposition's plays, how they're going to defend you, how you're going to defend them, whatever the case may be. And you don't get obsessed with either, but you pay the right amount of attention to both. So you understand what you're really, really good at, but you also have to understand how you're going to attack like somebody's defense, right? And I think that is kind of the analogy I use for this exact thing. Is like, all right, like we're going to be really good at, you know, we're going to run a lot of ball screens or whatever tonight, but we also need to be aware that like how they're going to defend these ball screens. And I think that it equates the same with this. We need to know, you know, God's plan for us and be, you know, very understanding and knowledgeable about that. But we also have to understand, like we said, Satan's plans and how he plans on defending us, you know, when it comes to what we're trying to accomplish. Because you can't do it all, like you can't go all on defense and you can't go all on offense. You have to have a good mixture of both. You know, I think about like as a hitter, what am I really good at? Okay, yeah, I want to do that a lot, but I also need to be aware of like, what does this pitcher do when he's behind in the count? What does this pitcher do with 2 strikes? I need to be aware so I can anticipate, you know, what they're trying to do to me, and then I can combat that. Like I have a plan for what they're planning to do to me.
Yeah, and that's kind of like for all the football people out there, or if you're like for me being a previous football coach, the guy that I had that mentored me for calling plays or whatever, we'd always come in on Sunday and he'd be like, okay, what are the things that we are good at? What is our identity? And, you write that on the board or whatever, and he goes, okay, now, what are they going to do to stop that? And then you got to be able to know, okay, they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then the next question is, what's our counter move?
Yep.
What are we going to do when they do that? And that's so relevant to life because you can go in with a plan and think that it's going to work, but then when you encounter Satan or you encounter struggles, you have got to be able to sit there, take a breath, assess the situation, and be able to then move on and go in the path in which you're supposed to go. And so I think that's very important. You have to be aware that yes, there will be outside forces that are trying to diminish what you're doing. And yes, there's going to be a time where your plan's not going to work and you're going to have to figure it out, and you're going to have to just acknowledge that there are other forces at play here that are larger than, what you think.
Yep. And I'll be real vulnerable about this for the next couple minutes. So for me, just being really vulnerable with, especially my career, I look at it more in my career. So I think about how Satan would counteract me personally, and a lot of it has to do with consistency, and it has to do with riding the highs too high and riding the lows too low. That's something that in my career I've struggled with the most, is one fantastic month and then followed by a really bad month and then a really good month and then a really bad, so it just kind of goes up and down. And I really feel for me that this year, that's something I've really put a lot of emphasis on, is riding the middle, riding that consistency. And, I just think about on field, it's you're swinging the bat really well. Well, the enemy's plan is, all right, let's let Dan swing the bat well. We're going to let him feel himself too much, and he's going to have to be humbled at some point, because he thinks he's got it figured out, and he stops focusing on the little things that got him to that point. And it's that by not having a set routine, it's so easy to fall back, to ride that high and then immediately hit the low. And then once you get low, it's you start completely self-doubting yourself. You don't know which way to turn. You don't know which way to go until you figure it out again. And I feel that's kind of how the enemy does it for me, is the highs are really high, the lows are really low. And without some type of consistent approach and routine, you can't maintain that consistency. Consistency, I feel for me, has been the killer for not only my career, but just in everyday life. It's things will be going great and then they're just not going great, and then they're going great and then they're just not going great. And now I really feel very at peace with my morning routine and committing to my morning routine, committing to my routine in the cage, just doing the same stuff every single day regardless of the situation. And then if things do go a little bit haywire, you have your, one or two go-to things that you plug in. And then they kind of get you back on track, and then you just roll with your same routine again. And I feel for me, that's the biggest challenge and hurdle when it comes to becoming the man I'm supposed to be, becoming the player that I want to become, and ultimately becoming, this king in God's kingdom. And I feel consistency is the thing that I've still been seeking for, and I'm really, really, been praying about it, and think that, I've kind of found that niche of how to do it.
Right. That just reminded me of going back when he's talking about the Navy SEALs, and he was just to the world it was extraordinary, to the Navy SEALs it was another day's work. It's what they do because it's who they have become. And I think that kind of goes into what you're saying about, what are you doing, the little things, the daily habits. It's that's your habits and routines is who you become consistently over time. It's not who you are the next day, but it's who you become, is riding those habits and those routines and the things that ultimately make you successful in a powerful kingdom that gets to hold more power. Because I think later in the chapter it says something about the kingdom rules by authority, and the only way to get more authority is by you know, controlling your kingdom as is, and then you'll be granted or gifted more part of his kingdom to grow and to get more people in your realm, right? So I think that just reminded me of that. It's just like what you do is ultimately who you become.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And I kind of think about it like this. Dansby, you're different because you're a professional athlete, but for Mitch and I now,
We got doubleheader in softball tonight.
Yeah, we got doubleheader,
there.
but big game tonight. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but
we're in first place.
We're in first place, but it's kind of like when I think every athlete has this period in their life where they've played and lifted weights and all throughout high school, and then you get to a period when you're done, whether it's college or after professionals, and I'm sure, Dansby, you'll go through this too, where when you get done playing, you're just kind of like, I don't really want to pick up a weight again right now, or I don't really want to go throw, or I don't really want to go do this or whatever. I don't want to look at a baseball. I don't want to watch baseball. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to go through a period of that. And I think as athletes, when you're washed and retired, then we go through this period where you have to kind of convince yourself to get back into doing those things. And I know like right now, Mitch and I are big into getting in the weight room. And so it's kind of like in the very beginning, you don't really have, like, it's not a routine. It's kind of like just something you're doing. But if you lift on a schedule, whatever your schedule is on the week for 7 months, you can bet that's part of your routine now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just that just becomes who you are. And, no, we don't like going into the weight room and putting heavy weight on our back or whatever, but we understand that that's a part of us being healthy and being in, the shape we're striving to be in. And so it's just something that you end up doing. Then all of a sudden it becomes, well, Mitch is going to the weight room too. Oh yeah, Mitch works out 4 or 5. Like, they just know because that's a part of him. Like, that's who he is.
Yeah. And I just want to feed off that too. It's like some of these habits and routines and stuff like aren't fun to do necessarily. No. Like, I'm not much. I know Dansby like enjoys like journaling and he's a writer and stuff, but like some days I have to like try to force myself to do it. But I know that the power that it has, and that is, people that are successful or people that are aligned with God, is like they have these times even when they're not convenient that they need to do what they need to do. And that's like doing these habits because you need to do them, not necessarily because you want to do them.
Well, you're entrusted with the kingdom, like we've been saying. So in order to keep our kingdom where we want it, you have to do the things that people don't want to do.
Yeah, man, it's so funny because me and Mitch, we were talking about this earlier on the phone. And sorry, we didn't include you, Mace. You were probably teaching. No, it's spring break.
He was definitely teaching.
Yeah. No, it's next week.
Oh. Well, so you were teaching then for sure. But
yeah, yes. He definitely was in school.
I was talking about like, so for Lent, I've never really like given up something for Lent to like actually commit myself to giving something up. And this year, Mal and I decided to commit to giving up something. And we gave up desserts. And for anybody that knows me, like,
that's tough. How you
like
doing,
I come from the Swansons, baby. Like, we got sugar tooth. Like, we all like that. Mitch and Mace know that whenever you came over, there was always the big bowl of like whatever like sweet snacks you could ever ask for. Like, we're that family that has perfected making chocolate chip cookies. Like, you name it, we're in on it. And when Mal suggested that that's what we do, I was just like, every bit of me was like, no. Like,
no way.
I'll give up like
no way is
one type of dessert. Like, I'll give up ice cream, but I ain't giving up like cookies or cake or whatever. And she's like, no, we're giving up sweets. Like, we're giving up desserts. No cookies, no brownies, no ice cream, no cake, no donuts, because your boy would hammer some donuts, And in the silliest way, like, fasting from a certain thing, like starving myself of a certain thing, as silly as it sounds, has made me a much better man. Like, because I feel like for whatever reason, it's like it takes willpower. It's like almost a spiritual thing of like allowing God to cleanse you of fasting from something. I don't even know how to explain it. I just know that Jesus fasted, and if he was doing it, it was probably pretty important. And it's like, in order for that like internal character, like mental fortitude to grow, you have to starve yourself of something. And I think, like, in a way, we talk about Satan's schemes, and it's like, okay, how does he scheme against me? Let's just say, for example, it's comparisons on social media. Like, that's how Satan tries to hold you down, is by self-doubt. It's like, why don't you fast from that for 2 weeks, right? Like, why don't you commit to getting rid of that and proving to yourself that you can, like, get over that? Because I'm telling you, for the first week of doing no desserts, your boy was hurting. Like, I was hurting. Like, it was not good. And then slowly but surely, I mean, we're probably 3.5 weeks in, and like,
oh, you're rolling.
I'm rolling, man. And like, not saying it's not difficult at times, because after some dinners, you're like, man, a little ice cream,
a tag along Girl Scout cookie might be
there's this like
little dosey dough.
Like
Cap
10
off
minutes
the
from
evening.
here. That, like, it's all, I always look forward to it. Not this year, but like, there's just like, it's gotten easier, and I'm just kind of saying, like, I've kind of proven to myself in a way that you can do anything if you commit to it and set your mind to it. And I think that, in a way, that lesson is to be learned, like as warriors, if we commit ourselves to God's kingdom, to God's plans, and use these tools of breathing, of fasting, like praying, all these things that Jesus did, like, we can do it too. And I feel like in those moments is when God's saying, like, hey, like, you are my sons, you are my children, like, I got your back. And like we said, you can't experience the full presence of God until you are in that moment, in those present moments. And if we're not in the present moments, we ain't gonna hear him, we ain't gonna see him. And some of these ways to do that, like, will allow us to grow in our walk. Sorry, I get really long-winded there, but it just, like, I feel like fasting's been on my heart probably for like the last like year and a half, and now, like, finally committed to something, and now I know why. Like, it was on my heart because it just has grown me so much, even as something as simple as like giving up desserts,
Yeah, and I think it's powerful too, like, you're seeing the results like pretty quickly, and like you said, like, you've been thinking about it, but then you finally just did it, and you're reaping the rewards, right? Like, a lot of these things, it's like you do it and like you instantly can see some rewards and results. Like, not saying they all come like that, but like some praying and meditation in the morning, like, that can change your entire day just in 10 minutes. The fasting, like, it brought Dansby closer to God, like, just by giving up sweets. It doesn't have to be something like so
Extreme.
right to make an impact.
It's the little things. The little things turn into big things. And that's, that's
Step by
good
step.
life advice. It's one thing at a time. Any final thoughts here? I'll let y'all go before.
I mean, I'm just kind of reading over the last little bit again, and just something I just think that is so powerful is just like remembering that, like, the death of Jesus disarmed power and authority of evil over the earth, and then his resurrection, like, defeated death, and the only thing that could, like, really hold us down. It just is. It's such a powerful chapter and message, and I just think that the more we walk in God, the greater the man that we become, the greater warrior, and all these things that this chapter talks about. And then, at the very end, it talks about, it says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. And I think that just the more that we can walk and live in, how God made us to be, we can open other people's eyes, open other people's hearts, their ears, so that they can hear, just all these different things. And, like I said earlier, just how many times have you missed out on opportunity to grow God's kingdom because you were self-absorbed, you were looking behind you or looking ahead, how many times have you missed like growing God's kingdom just because you weren't in the present moment centered around him?
I would just say, final thoughts, just I think really practicing some of these breathing techniques is I've read a book called Inner Sizes like a couple years ago, so I was like familiar with the breathing technique. I don't think I use it. Like, there's a lot of times I'm overwhelmed and I probably should be doing these things and I'm not. So just being more conscious of like practical exercises to kind of get you back in that present moment, because they are out there and there's ways to get back aligned and present and being, back to your true self and not getting strayed away from that. And then also just kind of like at the end of the chapter, what we were saying is just like, be conscious of like, God does have a plan for you, but Satan is doing what he can to mess that plan up. So just be conscious and aware that whatever God's trying to do, Satan's trying to ruin that. So don't let him do that.
Yeah. I think my thoughts are kind of the same thing. Is, the big thing for me is the little things become the big things, and you got to be prepared to stick to your way and stick to your hobbies and stick to your habits, and just doing what you are set out to do is a big component of that. And the other part of it is, none of this is easy. Like, none of the things that we're talking about is easy. Whether it's Dansby giving up desserts or whether it's us trying to become, the best king possible in this kingdom. Like, it's hard, and there are going to be days that are harder than others, and if you just keep on making these changes and trying to implement them into your daily life, they will come.
Yep.
It's like Muhammad Ali said, he doesn't start counting the reps until it starts to hurt.
Yeah, 1, 2.
When it starts to hurt, that's when you really start counting the reps. That's when
saying.
It matters. That's the difference making stuff.
I count from the jump.
the last thing I'll say too about that, Mace, is like, it's not easy. Sticking to routines and habits is important, but I think it's like even more important to have like those audibles, essentially, because there are times where you may get out of like your routine a little bit, and like you don't want to become so attached to that routine that you feel that you can't operate. Or if things aren't going as well, like what is that button that you can press that gets you back into being centered around God? You know what I mean? Like, every football play's got, a couple different audibles depending on what the defense is running. So if Satan switches up how he does things, like what is your audible to, be able to adjust on the fly? I think that's like almost equally as important as well.
But we just want to continue to thank you guys for not only listening but watching as well. A lot of people are watching online, and a lot of people are commenting and sending us messages on our Instagram. Continue to reach out. We love that. We love hearing from you guys. We love hearing that people are creating groups to read this book along with us and just following the conversation. It's just good to continue to grow and to develop our community. So we just want to say thank you to all you guys, and we will see you guys in the next episode.